Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to what I consider as one of the most important sessions of this seminar. Uh, as India celebrates its 75th Independence Day, it is placed at a unique junction. It is simultaneously both a septuagenarian and a child with dreams and aspirations for new future. The vision for New India is that of a greener, cleaner, digitally savvy, and well connected nation which is able to take care of the infrastructure needs of its own populace as well as serve as an example to the global community on infrastructure build-up and financing. To achieve the target of a US $5 trillion GDP and continue its growth journey well beyond the 75th year of independence, India needs to undertake massive investments in infrastructure at fast pace. However, achievement of this rapid growth in infrastructure investment will be dependent upon the availability of adequate financing. To discuss such an important issue, we are fortunate to have today a very interesting lineup of speakers as well as panelists. We will start this session by a special address from Mr. Sujay Bose, MD and CEO of National Investment in Infrastructure Fund. Sujay is a business leader with over a 3 years decades of extensive experience in emerging markets, investing in project finance, infrastructure, industrials, and service sectors. During his career, he has worked on the projects covering over 50 countries across Asia, Africa, US, Latin America, Caribbean, etc. He joined NIF as an MD and CEO in 2016 and is currently based in Mumbai. Prior to joining NIF, he has spent over 25 years as in IFC, the private investment and financing arm of the World Bank. With this brief introduction, I'll hand over to Sujay. Sujay, all up to you.
Thank you, Himanshu. It's a pleasure to be here. And first of all, congratulations to the entire FICCI team for having put together a fantastic agenda. And here also a great panel. And I'm not going to take up too much time because I think we really want to hear from the panel who's actually working on the ground and from Mr. Barua, who's obviously a very important person in terms of the regulatory environment for some of the products that the sector uses. Now, for India to become a productive, competitive manufacturing services hub, it is crucial for us to reduce our cost of producing and distributing energy and also reduce the cost of logistics to move products from one point to another and to export it. And that's what a lot of us, of course, I mean, we could also talk about the cost of moving data around, etc. But really, that's the business that most of us are in, which is helping to bring down energy costs, logistics costs, transportation costs, and cost of data. And that's why I believe that the next few years is going to be a fascinating and exciting time for the infrastructure sector in India, because now there is a lot of focus on it. We've all heard about the National Infrastructure Pipeline. And this is going to create tremendous opportunity for all of us who are engaged in this sector. But like you said, Himanshu, what we are talking about here is financing. And the key thing becomes, it's great to have plans to do $1.5 trillion of infrastructure development, but how will it be financed? And that's what a lot of us are in the business of. And what I think is that going forward in this cycle of infrastructure development, not only is it going to be at an unprecedented scale, but I think it's also going to be in a much more sounder footing than what we have seen in the past. And that's because we've learned some lessons from what happened in previous cycles, but also because I think the government this time has very clearly understood one thing, and they've done a very good job of it, which is that not everything in the infrastructure life cycle is good for everyone who wants to invest in that sector. And that's, I think, the crucial piece. Now, what do I mean by that? And let me start by the people, the investors that we work with at NIIF. And NIIF, of course, as many of you know, is a public-private partnership between the government and very large institutional investors from around the world. So we've got 13 investors from a number of different countries, sovereign funds, pension funds, development finance institutions, multilateral development banks, etc. And they've all come together in a collaborative platform, which is NIIF, and we manage funds, and our largest fund is in the infrastructure sector. And we've so far raised, just for the infrastructure sector, we have close to $5 billion of equity capital available between the various structures that we have. That enables us to do a lot in the sector. But coming back to the point that I was making, our investors are not interested in investing into every piece of the infrastructure life cycle. So, for example, pension funds will not want to invest in the greenfield part of infrastructure. On the other hand, they are extremely happy to take long-term operating risk on infrastructure projects and hold those investments for a long time. And also, they have substantial amount of capital that they want to invest into that sector. So, a lot of people often ask me, why isn't NIIF doing more in greenfield? That's because that's not really what our investors would like us to do. And at the end of the day, a fund manager operates on basically what investors are seeking. But what is really interesting about this cycle of infrastructure development is that the government has understood this and they are creating products for these investors to invest into. So the TOT, program in the road sector, the airport monetizations, and of course the InvITs, which Harsh is here. I'm sure Mr. Barua will talk about the InvITs. It's been such a successful sector in absorbing capital so far, and of course has to be very carefully grown so that it continues to absorb capital not only from international investors but also from domestic institutional investors. That's really, I think, a key piece of what we are trying to do this time, which is target products to people who actually want to invest in the products. Having said that, there's also a lot of work the government is doing on the greenfield side. So in some ways, of course, greenfield is where EPC players, we have Govindan here from L&T, who I'm sure talk about it, but greenfield players, EPC players will benefit a lot from greenfield development. And then we have the HAMs, the different kinds of structures that the government has started to introduce to reduce the risk of development capital going into, I would say, the riskiest part of the infrastructure cycle, which is the greenfield part. And I think that is what will enable the different kinds of risk, people with different kinds of risk appetite, to play in the infrastructure life cycle where they are comfortable. And if we are able to build infrastructure and recycle it to the deep pockets, I think the sector will flourish over time. And of course, I should end by mentioning that all of us, I think, around this group are also looking forward to the national monetization pipeline being executed, whereby almost $70 billion of public infrastructure assets will be brought to either PPP in a PPP format or in a concession format for many investors to invest into. So Himanshu, long story short, I think it's a very exciting time. I think we've learned a lot of lessons, and this time around we are well prepared to address many of the risks that we have faced in the past. And I think we have, of course, I look forward to hearing from Mr. Barua about some of the work that SEBI is doing, and of course from this fantastic panel on what they are seeing on the ground and how many of us can support them in their work. Thank you very much for inviting me, and look forward to an interesting discussion.
Thank you very much, Sujoy. I think for this interesting take. I think a couple of points that resonated very well with me were, I think both private sector and public sector, private players and public sector have learned from their mistakes. And I think government is now creating products which are not what they only meet their need, but also the investor needs. And I think it's a very important take that you had. And I believe that is what will increase participation and bring that to the market. So that's an interesting one. I think now I have a great pleasure in introducing Mr. Anant Barua, who is the whole-time director at SEBI. Mr. Barua looks after market intermediaries and regulations Department of Debt and Hybrid Securities, Enforcement, Legal Affairs, Inquiry and Adjudication, and Board Cell. Prior to his appointment, he was executive director at SEBI and has handled multiple departments in SEBI, such as investment management, Department of Debt and Hybrid Security, corporate finance, legal affairs, etc. He was instrumental in developing the debt market framework for issue and listing of debt securities, AIFs, municipal bonds, REITs, and InvITs. So I think we couldn't have had a better person to talk about infrastructure financing than Mr. Barua. On personal note, I've known Mr. Barua since 1992, since the time he joined SEBI, and have had multiple occasions to work with him on very important capital market reforms projects across 30 years. I've always admired his domain expertise, ability to comprehend complex issues, and his unparalleled drafting and interpretation skills. With this brief introduction, I'll leave the floor open to Mr. Barua for his keynote address. Mr. Barua, all over to you. Thank you.
Sir, please unmute yourself.
Sir, you are on mute.
It is fine now?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Barua.
Thank you for a good introduction, Mr. Himangshu. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my pleasure to speak to the audiences on infrastructure financing. Actually, Mr. Ghosh, he hit the nail right in the beginning that there is a lot of investors, but they are wary of investing in greenfield projects. And therefore, I will address those issues, greenfield and both refinancing through this one. And for any developing country, including India, financing of greenfield is a challenge. Recently, the government of India has set up national financing infrastructure development as a principal development financial institutions with the purpose to facilitate financing greenfield infrastructure projects and also for taking over or refinancing such existing loan, which is expected to give fillip to the infrastructure financing. However, the DFI alone will not resolve all the infrastructure financing issues. It needs to be supplemented by the existing structure of project financing through banks or focused NBFCs in the initial stages, and then there need to have a refinancing and other capital market through takeover finance from those who have lent in the initial stages through InvIT or securitizations. And also there is also need for instruments like trade enhancements and also requirement how these infrastructure financings are rated. And in India, the banks has been the predominant institutions which have been lending for infrastructure financing. But we have seen that it has come down after 2016 drastically. And my view remains that ideal way of funding infrastructure project is greenfield funding by banks, focused NBFI and DFIs, and refinance by capital market. And we have seen India actually sponsors prefer banks loans due to flexibility of their interest cost. However, Indian banking model is retail. 50% of deposit are maturing in less than 1 year. Globally, we have seen banks in advanced markets tap capital market as source of long-term funding through covered bonds, medium-term notes programs, asset-backed securities. However, the Indian banks rely on capital market purely to meet capital requirement of tier 1 and tier 2. And therefore, the time has come they should tap the capital market for also funding project finance. And banks also to recycle capital through takeout financings in capital market. As regards the bond market is concerned, We have seen that increasingly it is playing a role in financing corporates. This is evident from increased issuances of corporate bonds, with fund raised increasing from rupees 4.9 lakh crores in 2015-16 to 7 lakh 82,000 crore in 2021. And further, this outstanding corporate bond as a proportion to GDP has increased from 13% of GDP to about 17% of GDP in the financial year 2020-21. And normally we have seen the about 45% of issuances are of duration of maturity 3 to 5 years. But increasingly we have seen that long-term issuers are also coming. I wanted to give example of bond raised by some long-term issuers in June 2021. IRFC has raised 1,994 crore for 20 years at the yield of 6.99%. Similarly, PFC has raised 1,994 crore for 15 years at the yield of 7.11. SDFC has raised 2,000 crore for maturing for 10 years at the yield of 6.88. Similarly, ICICI Bank has raised rupees 2,027 crore, 7 years at the yield of 6.45. During the early stage of planning and construction, equity investments and bank loans represent majority of financings. Once project enters a mature stage and establishes stable cash flows, long-term capital requirement becomes important, which can be tapped via bond issuances to help gain access to diverse range of institutional investors. So already the lot of issues has been taken to address liquidity in the bond market, like request for quote program, and also new instrument like credit default swaps are being ushered in. So I will not go on detail on those things. And one of the important thing we have seen as far as the infrastructure projects in the under construction stage in the initial years typically are rated BB or below, and thus unable to meet regulatory requirements of investors like insurance and pension funds. And therefore, a structured credit enhancement program can be put the additional layer of security and make these bonds investment grade, which can then be placed in the capital market. In the budget 2019, a proposal for setting up of credit enhancement for infrastructure project, Credit Guarantee Enhancement Corporation, was proposed. And such corporations can play important role for credit enhancement, which will also result in proper risk distribution through sell down. And we have seen also partial credit and guarantee, which was introduced by RBI. However, that has also not taken off to that extent, because these guidelines puts caps in terms of extent to which credit enhancements can be provided. That is 50% of the issue size and the amount of credit enhancement that an individual bank can provide. That is 20% of issue size. Generally, the credit enhancement required for the one-notch upgrade in rating of corporate papers is a range of 8 to 10%. With cap of 50%, most of the projects rated BBB minus can get a post enhancement rating in the A category, which is low compared to AA plus rating expected by insurance company and provident fund segment. Given the requirement to undertake assessments and a cap of 20% credit enhancement for individual banks, it would need at least 3 banks to provide 50% credit enhancement. It has been difficult to arrange 3 banks willing to provide credit enhancements on the single project. Hence, then we need to revisit this cap. And as far as the rating is concerned, we wanted that the rating of infrastructure requires a different regime. The infrastructure projects in the Indian market receive ratings on the lower side of the rating scale when rated on the conventional probability of default based rating scale due to low cash flows at the initial stage, even if underlying assets are on a positive side. The PD based scale does not adequately capture the strength associated with infrastructure project as under steady cash flows post completion of stabilizations, monopolistic market positions, and low technological obsolescence risk. PPP infrastructure projects also have additional safeguards like termination payment, non-corporate, non-compete clause, strong counterparty. Gate enhancements structural features like ring fencing of cash flows, well-established cash flow waterfall mechanism. CRS have developed a rating scale based on expected loss methodology for infrastructure projects to complement conventional credit rating that accord probability of default rating. The expected loss focuses on recovery of dues to investors and lenders over the life cycle of infrastructure project. Under EL scale, credit profile of an infrastructure project improves when project stabilizes. SEBI on 16 July has introduced this expected loss rating that is divided in a scale of 7 levels, spanning from lowest EL1 to highest expected loss of EL7. The new scale are to be used by credit rating agencies for rating of projects instrument associated with infrastructure sector to begin with. And we have seen that in the developed countries, the instrument like securitization is greatly used. And recently, RBI has come out with the guidelines where draft guidelines, which is under consultations. And one of the things which it proposes is that it seeks to make mandatory if any standard assets of RMBS, residential mortgage securities, is if exposure is more than 500 crore, the listing has been made. Actually, in this context, I wanted to bust one myth. Actually, we have seen that there are not two models which are available for securitizations. One is of standard asset and another is SARFAESI Act. And in the market, it is generally felt that no entity other than the HFCs or NBFCs or banks, which are regulated by RBI, can issue securitized debt paper. However, I want to bring to the knowledge of the audience that already SEBI in 2008 had made a regulations which is known as Public Offer and Listing of Securitized Debt Instruments, Regulation 2008. Under this structure, the SPV is known as it is known as this instrument under the regulation is known as securitized debt instruments. And under this framework, any PTC issued under the framework of RBI or by any ARC or securitizations company can be listed in the stock exchanges. And under the SEBI framework, SEBI, it allows even trade enhancement under the schemes. And therefore, the SEBI mechanism is also available other than these entities, even DFIs or NHI or any other entity which you want to securitize their loan portfolio. This avenue is available and it can be used. In fact, actually in 2013, the IFMR Capital, they originated 8 microfinance loan and that was listed in 2013. And after that, we have not seen any issuances on that. And the next one is the InvIT. And actually, this product was introduced in 2013 and we have done a lot of road shows and other things. I think this audience may not need to know the structure of the InvIT. Only thing I will just bring to the knowledge that there are no 4 avenues are available under this structure. One is publicly issued InvITs with minimum 80% of completed asset and revenue generating assets. Then privately placed InvITs can invest in PPP projects in pre-COD, achieved completion of 50% of constructions or spend not less than 50% of capital cost. Then for non-PPP projects can invest in under construction, which has received all approvals for commencing constructions. And there is also the unlisted InvITs. And we have seen so far about 65,000 crore has been raised through InvITs. Now the asset under management of InvIT is 2,81,782. And this InvIT is expected to play a major role in government's asset monetization program. The Power Grid has raised about 7,007 crore by monetizing its transmission assets, and NHI is also expected to help monetize more than 7,000 crores with operational highway assets. And they have already obtained the SEBI registrations, and then we expect them to hit the market soon. And our only suggestion is that there is a need to replicate the success of InvIT model across infrastructure sectors like freight corridors, metro rails, oil pipeline, power transmissions, ports, and renewable energy, etc. This was actually the issues on the supply side. And as you know, there is a lot of constraint in the demand side. And normally we have seen as far as the Indian markets are concerned, Indian debt capital market have diverse set of participants. However, due to investment restrictions, the number of participants within each investor class remains limited, thereby constraining the depth of liquidity pool available within each class. I wanted to give an example that there is a restrictions around non-participation of insurance companies in private limited companies issuances. Investment restrictions linked to the net worth of the issuer has been prescribed. It needs to be understood that in case of infrastructure financing, the cash flows are backed by cash flows and not by asset. Similarly, the PFRD and others, they have allowed investment up to 5% of InvITs. However, if they have linked this investment on the InvIT having a minimum AA or equivalent rating on the sponsor of the InvIT and a rating by 2 rating agencies. And here also we need to understand that the InvIT's rating and ability to service debt is based on the cash flows held by InvIT, and it has no connection with the sponsor. These are my initial observations. If any other thing is there, I will address. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barua. I think for that in-depth perspective. I think your suggestion on relaunching the structured credit enhancement program with liberal cap is indeed a very valid suggestion. I think that will open up the doors for infrastructure financing as never before. Thank you, Mr. Barua. And now it's time for the panel discussion. At this point, I would like to hand over the baton to Mr. Shubham Jain, Senior Vice President and Group Head, Corporate Sector Rating, ICRA Limited, who will be moderating this panel session. With an aggregate work experience of more than 15 years, Mr. Jain is a SVP and Group Head at ICRA. And he's also, in addition to serving the chair of the rating committee for the company. Mr. Jain handles diversified portfolio, including large and mid-cap corporates, include in various key sectors like real estate, construction, infrastructure, etc. With the help of a team of more than 40 credit analysts across multiple branches. He handles a very large portfolio of rating cases as well as research responsibility for the above mentioned sector. Mr. Jain has led at the existence for devising the new rating framework for infrastructure sector and country under the aegis of Department of Economic Affairs. He has also assisted the ATRE committee formed by the Ministry of Defense to devise the criterion for selection of strategic partners for private sector. With this brief introduction of Mr. Jain, I will hand it over to Mr. Jain. Mr. Jain, the panel is yours. Please conduct after introducing the relevant panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kaji. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on expediting infrastructure financing to build new India. We have an esteemed panel of experts for today's discussion. Our first panelist is Mr. R. Govindan, who is associated with Larsen & Toubro Limited as Executive Vice President and Chief Risk Officer. He heads critical functions of treasury, funding, risk management, and insurance for the L&T Group. Mr. Govindan wears a dual hat of being an active debt issuer as well as lender to infrastructure sector. So we'll try to extract maximum out of him in today's discussion. Our second panelist is Ms. Nipa Sheth, who is founder and director of Trust Group of Companies, a full-service financial services house. Ms. Sheth has been ranked amongst India's top 100 women in finance in the year 2020. Prior to Trust, she has worked with HRS Insight Financial Intermediaries Private Limited from the year 1994 to 2001. And our third panelist is Mr. Harsh Shah, who is CEO at IndiGrid, which is India's first InvIT. He is also a member of SEBI's Advisory Committee for InvITs and REITs and Financial Market Committee of CII. Prior to joining Sterlite Group, he has worked with Larsen & Toubro, L&T Infrastructure Finance Company Limited, and Procter & Gamble. As we all are aware that investment in infrastructure sector acts as a major propeller for economic growth. The same has been recently witnessed in COVID-struck year FY21, where government initiatives to push infra investments came as a big savior for the economy. We also have a very ambitious NIP plan, which entails a huge ramp up of funding requirements for the sector. But still, the perennial issues of ALM mismatch, absence of deep bond market, NPA overhang, etc., continues to impact the flow of funding in the sector. Over time, however, various innovative models have been implemented successfully, which Mr. Barua has also enumerated, like InvITs, TOT, privatization of airports, pooling structures, etc. And also, M&A activity has remained quite vibrant with robust interest from large PE players, but mainly in operational projects. At the same time, there have been many missed opportunities as well. So today in this panel discussion over the next 30-35 minutes, we will try to deliberate on such issues and also the possible solutions which can aid infrastructure financing to build new India. With this, I will request the eminent panelists to give a broad overview on how they think funding has evolved for infrastructure sector in the last decade and what is their outlook on the same in medium term. So I request Mr. Govindan to start with his views, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. You can hear me, I hope.
Yes.
Thanks for this opportunity. I think the big picture sense is that after 2004 to 2008 period, probably only the COVID has, though medical emergency created an economic emergency, and I think the government came into act. And then after a long time, we are going to see probably investment-led growth. For a large period between 2008 and 2020 almost, we were looking at a consumption-led growth. So a lot of maybe whether I think what choice, I mean, we've gone through different eras in that area, in that framework. I think as things stand today, I think there is a lot of experiences. I think Sujay mentioned, I think also Mr. Anand Barua mentioned, a lot of experiences have been gained. I think the significant experience is the fact that there are risks in you do greenfield infrastructure, a lot of issues, but quite a lot of infrastructure risk at the beginning period comes on right of way. Some of the public issues typically which happens is government, local, state or central government, government agencies are the best position to deal with it. You expect somebody else to deal with it, it is very difficult to do. So the sort of projects when it in the initial phase, let us say if you look at a metro or you look at anything, we have had cases where you build a metro, elevated metro line. From there, there is no landing because there's a court case going on. Some pawn shop has put a court case and things get hanging for 5 years. So you have an elevated hanging metro where it cannot be functional. So you got a lot of issues like this which typically happen when you do the greenfield. Now the government and the local agencies are the best in the best position to mitigate. You can't just say actually, if you look at it, there are in three phases. Initial phase, government was very, very keen to remove this risk and come to the project. So that was the period between 1998 and 2002, 2003. That period, whatever happens, it was sort of meaningfully de-risked infrastructure projects came on a PPP platform. There were different issues, whether the people will pay toll and all that. There were the risk issues at that point of time. The greenfield risks were reasonably eliminated. Subsequently, because of economic growth, a lot of things happened, but the government kept on tightening the screws in terms of passing on the risk to the private sector, passing on the risk to the developer, passing on the risk to whoever is trying to develop the project. So a situation came where there was only risk, there was no reward, right? Beyond a point, I think people walked into it. These are the lessons learned. People walked into it with only risky projects, no expectation of return. Forget about where will the equity come from. Let us say the developer puts his own equity. The debt, whatever comes from, unlikely it will become difficult. So very little money or very little, it was only risky projects which came in primarily because government packaged it in such a fashion, only risk available. Subsequently, the road projects, they came with HAM model, lot of de-risked thing. And then it worked out beautifully. The power grid experience and if you look at the power transmission experience, how a reasonably de-risked project can be a successful model has worked out beautifully. Even in airports, it's been a very successful model. So it is initially the risk which is there at the beginning time. Who should deal with it? A developer, it's not possible for him to deal with it. You can't expect banks to take that risk. You can't expect a capital market to take that risk. You will have to deal with it at the government level because most of the risk are issues related to public interest and stuff like that. You really need to deal with it, right? So you need to have proper framework on how you will mitigate risk and how will you qualify companies with good financial strength and technical strength and capability to do a high quality project for a long period of time. That process should be there. If these two things are there, financing is not really a problem. In fact, I frankly don't, with the sort of role the government has played and the way the GST has got implemented, the tax to GDP ratio, my personal view is that is going to go up by 3 to 4% per annum. So you can afford the government itself will be in a position to do a lot of projects on an EPC basis. It need not be on they may not need that level of funding. So I'm very the sort of digitization, the sort of work which they have done. So a lot of headwinds which were there over the last 7-8 years has become tailwinds. The fiscal deficit is going to be very less over a long period of time, provided growth is around 6.5-7% we are able to maintain, and high quality projects, only commercially viable projects we should get into the platform now. Socially relevant projects should be done by the government without involving anybody, any investor and all that, because very difficult really to have credibility if we do that. So if you have a reasonable good selection of projects, I think it is available in many areas. You also need to do, once the projects are done, you can't have change of rule. Like, you have had this AP coming and, changing the PPA completely. Some of those issues will have to be addressed. So it's not really, I think a lot of good experiences are there, a lot of difficult experiences have been there. But I think if you look at the choice of project and choice of selection of promoter, I think banks, mutual funds, capital markets, they are all there to support. I don't think, you can do better with the provident fund industry and the insurance industry with a bit more support. It will be useful. If you have some more international players coming into the market, it will be useful. But I don't think there is going to be significant differences as we move on. There are a lot of enough learnings, but high quality projects high quality developers is what they have to choose. Financing, I don't think is going to be a killer. It's not that good project. I think we always have. Yeah, except some cases like thermal power and stuff like that, ESG, some of the things will be challenging. But I think as long as you do something socially relevant and economically viable, projects will find funding. Let it be in the equity and debt market. That has been our experience. Yes, we have not come with the economically viable projects. I think we have tried to package lot. I think the best part is what has happened in some of the InvITs, some of the REIT, how successful they are. Primarily because I think we have de-risked the projects and capital markets are more than happy to take such projects. Initially, the understanding was a bit lower. After that experience has come, even lending to InvIT and all that has all become easier. I mean, if you have a high quality project, reasonably high quality project, private financing, international financing, both on equity and debt, all those structures are available. I think it is just that you need to find the right type of project and then not keep building only roads, competing roads and all of that, because you really have to find economic viability in the whole thing. You can't just keep repeating the same thing, hopefully, because rail at some point of time will compete with road. The freight corridor will compete with roads. You really have to maintain a balance on how we do, instead of it should be done in an integrated fashion, not just one agency looks at the whole thing and then take their own only their point of view in mind. So roads will compete with public roads will compete with the freight corridors. They will compete with ports. They will compete with that's all logistics. I think at some point of time they'll all get interlinkages. We really need to look at it in an integrated fashion, which central government can do and state governments also can do in their own way. So high quality projects, I see absolutely no constraints. I think fiscal side also, I think things will be okay. I'm very optimistic about what can happen.
Sure. Thank you, sir. And I think you brought very relevant points on having strong pre-qualification norms so that we are very choosy about which projects are going to qualified contractors and developers. So Harsh, will request you to add on what Mr. Govindan had mentioned. So what is your outlook? Let's forget about the past and just focus on future. How do you look at the financing market?
Sure. Well, thank you, Shubham, for having me here. I think when Mr. Govindan has covered some fundamentals and how the past has played out, I think few things that we as a country, government, private sector, public sector participants need to take care in the future about. I would like to focus on that. To start with, I would take Mr. Govindan's point and mention capital or financing is not really a challenge today. Fortunately, India has reserved the fiscal prudence during the COVID period while the rest of the world is really providing liquidity. So probably India has a little bit of cushion to go aggressive if it needs to over the next 3 to 5 years on fiscal side. So that's a good position for the country, which will translate into stable period. Now, how can we as a country leverage it is what we need to focus on. First one is having clarity of thought. What are the businesses under which government is going to remain? What are the businesses that the government is not going to remain? As Mr. Govindan said, some of the social projects or other difficult projects to be executed by a non-government agency initially was started by government to ensure that they reach fruition. But eventually they become self-serving and say, this is what government's business is. To run a port or run a road or run a power plant. Whereas in reality, these were the initial phases where the greenfield financing was not available for the projects of this magnitude of complexity. Government's role was to build the infrastructure and then eventually monetize, which will create more capacity, both fiscal and operational capacity for government to redeploy that back into building new capacities like that. Unfortunately, where we are stuck today is that all such investment have become either a PSU or a PSU investment and nobody wants to part with their assets. So I think that's something which needs to come from the top. It has started. We've been talking about the monetization pipeline for several years now. But I think it needs an impetus from the center that this is not a business we don't want to be. We will exit. Even if we build it, we will monetize eventually in a predictable manner, which would drive a lot of capital both foreign as well as domestic capital towards those sectors. Now, whether it's metro, railway, or different infrastructure, now, unfortunately, all of them have become, hybrid, that we want to monetize part, but we want to keep control, we want to continue to run the asset, and then we want to build the asset. So the clarity of thought from government is something which is important to different ministries. Some of them may not be monetizable, that is fine, but that clarity needs to come so that that flows down into the monetization pipeline predictably. And therefore, you have a long-term horizon where both investors, private participants, etc., build businesses to make capital free for government. And that's one big thought around that. Second, I would, to be honest, commend Mr. Barua, who laid the foundation stone of InvIT, SEBI, RBI, Ministry of Finance, everyone. Coming from InvIT's thing, yes, it took some time to establish, but today, as we speak, in first 3-4 years since the first InvIT, I think most of the regulatory hurdles are removed. Insurance have been allowed to invest. PF recently, just last week, have been allowed to invest now. And for public InvITs, the lot size has come to single unit like an equity. So I think all the initial hurdles between regulators, they've made very well and eventually made the platform so robust that, in first 3-4 years, we're talking about 2 lakh crores of assets under InvIT, or 2 or 3 lakh crore, which is, I would say, to be honest, a phenomenal success. And next, after mutual funds, right? If you go back mutual funds, that was 1993. It took a decade to reach to this kind of asset size. This time around, it's much faster. So there is something right that has happened in this part. Now it's about providing supply. When the global liquidity is at high, domestic liquidity is high, this is the time for government to go big in terms of monetizing its passive assets, release equity. Just to give an example, I think Power Grid did an InvIT about 7,000 crores of capital raised, right? And it became a huge success, of course, because it's first. But there is about 2 lakh crores of infrastructure assets and state transmission assets, which are unlisted, sitting on state balance sheets. States are running deficits, continuing. But are we thinking of monetizing those eventually? Same goes for different municipal assets, etc. So now is the time to have the national monetization pipeline structured, take buy-in of the states, and make it easier to monetize those assets and make it, I would say, non-controversial for states to take those decisions on their own and monetize, whether it's InvIT, whether it's TOT, whether it's direct sale, lease back, whichever models. So supply needs to be created. Demand is already there. Capital is there. Financing is there. Supply needs to be created in a structured, predictable manner, transparent manner, that things, foreign capital, domestic capital can be deployed. But I think all the steps that the government is taking is in the right direction. I think my outlook is very positive, but the only thing which I am concerned about is the speed in which the overall machinery is moving today. Well, we are going in the right direction, but we need to expedite the speed, because you have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity of such liquidity for government to monetize and, really create capital to expand for under construction assets.
Thanks, Ash. Mr. Seth, you work very closely with the market. You help issuers to tie up funds. You interact with investors day on, day out. So what are you hearing from the market? How is the optimism in the market? What are the feelers in the market? If you can just elaborate on that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Shubham. First of all, thank you so much for, it's a great privilege to be part of this panel. I think before me, we had Mr. Sujoy, Mr. Govindanji and Harsh giving their ideas about, infrastructure. And we had Mr. Barua, who actually is, ensuring that there are foundation stone for Indian infrastructure to grow. So, there is a lot less I can add to this experience combined together. However, I feel, that the way government has planned the NIP and, $1.6 trillion of spending and what we are looking at over the next 5 years, it is not going to be met by bank, and which is very well understood by all stakeholders, ministry and, all the relevant statutory authorities. And I think the foundation has been laid by ensuring that we have very, very strong place. So we've had InvIT where we started the journey from 2013 to today in 2021, where we actually have seen ups and downs, ensuring all the regulatory bottlenecks have been moved forward. And in last 2 years, we actually can see the acceptance by investor. I think there is a lot of effort by SEBI as well as Finance Ministry to ensure that whatever were issues, either in terms of taxation, in terms of clarification, and I think most importantly now over the last 6 months or so, to ensure that insurance and pensions are able to accept these instruments as their investments, and not just the units of these InvITs and REITs, and also finding a way to debt for these issuers, ensuring a right amount of mix of debt equity to ensure that an operating project moves. I think a lot of understanding has come from regulator to do that, and I think investors are understanding as much. And hence, over the last 1 to 2 years, you've seen a lot of acceptance by all infrastructure projects, which is being put either in domestic market or in global market. So earlier we saw more global market investor participants, but over the last 2 years, we have started seeing the participation by insurance and pension funds, which is a very, very important pool of capital for us to ensuring that the long-term operating project find its way there, and therefore the system is open to have more greenfield project funding which is possible. So over the years we have seen that the roads, transmission, warehousing, these are the projects which are very well accepted. We are also seeing a lot of interest in renewables today. I feel one bottleneck in terms of a lot of power companies actually have the dues from DISCOMs at state government level. And I think if a right amount of solution is found to ensure that this piece is taken care of, I think we'll see equally good interest in even the renewable and the power projects which is coming in. We have also seen the HAM project being a fantastic project. Today we are not really seeing what we saw almost 8-9 years back, that the greenfield project funding was an issue. Today, given the government grant and I think the overall model, banks are very happy funding the greenfield project. And we have seen the first HAM projects actually in capital market sometime in last fortnight by GR Infra, and we have seen people accepting these very well. Also, the interest rate risk has been quite well covered by these new way of financing. But I think similar manner, if the other infrastructure is taken care of, it can go a long way in capital market. Thank you.
And also, you have rightly pointed out that this $5 trillion dream. Now, definitely banks cannot fund it all. But one issue that we see from FPIs and mutual funds, that they're interested in putting money, but generally short to medium term money, 3 to 5 years, which inherently exposes the infrastructure assets to refinancing risk. So what's your take on that?
Yeah. Please. So my sense is I completely agree with you, and therefore the long-term infrastructure funding has to be met with a long-term investment need. And I think opening up of the segments of insurance and pension to these funding, especially operating piece, will go a long way, because those are the people who can take the risk. In fact, as Mr. Barua mentioned, and I think he practically knows where are the issues on insurance and pension, where we are actually going for credit enhancement. They're still not good enough from the guidelines perspective. However, the new guidelines have come for infrastructure rating, and maybe more acceptance would be there. And I think the private limited as well as the net worth criteria, I think if they can be looked at a different manner, our pension and insurance industry is growing at fantastic level, apart from the FPI, which we are seeing. And if we are ensuring a little bit of tweak in those guidelines to ensure there is no incremental risk taken, I think those would be the right guidance to take there. However, projects like HAM, which are priced every year based on the interest rate risk, today are capable of taking a short-term risk because there is no uncertainty of the cash flows, but at the same time, interest rate risk, which most of the mutual funds or banks may not be very happy to take, are ready to reprice given the inflation and rate scenario.
Sure, sure. Mr. Govindan, you lead the treasury. So when you raise such instruments which comes with the refinancing call options, so how do you mitigate your risk while raising money through such instruments?
You have to look at the real, as you do ALM in a bank, we are, companies also have to do ALM. And they are allowed to look at they are dealing with the actual economic asset, not a financial asset. But still, you will have cash flows over a long period of time, and you'll have to keep that sense of ALM in mind. I think most of the problems in life is balance sheet related. It is like, stock and flow. You can afford to have a loss in a 1 year, but your balance sheet goes bad during a bad period of time, you go bust. Typically, that has been the experience which is there. So ALM sort of thinking is required when we do this as a company. I think you'll really have to look at the capital structure and the buffer. Like, I think some of the COVID experience, like who would have thought, I mean, nobody understood what is this damn COVID, okay? Whether the vaccination will be found at all or not. And even if you found it will work or not, whether it will come, even if it works, it will come work the second time, third time, delta, gamma, theta, vega, whatever, all of it. Now, from a company perspective, we were actually went through an experience, and I don't mind sharing it here. What we actually said is, liquidity is the king. I mean, you just need as much of cash as possible. So capital structure was there. We raised as much long-term liquidity. We wanted to be ALM positive for next 5-6 years. Whatever liabilities are there, I need to have a lot more cash. Almost 5-6 years of salary payments and this, because you don't know how long this thing will come. Yeah, you will have to deal with the carry because you're raising long-term resources, deploying in short-term instruments. You will have to deal with the carry, but that's a cost you have to pay. That's a board level discussion. Whether you want to have, whether that's that's the price of certainty. You want to be certain that you will live through. You'll have to pay a bit of insurance premium, right? For that. That's the sort of thought which is there. And I also believe this financing, infrastructure financing, even mutual funds, 5 year. I don't think it will be very simplistic to assume take one asset, this asset will go to this pensions for the next 50 years. That's not going to happen. If you're looking at an asset like metros, or if you're looking at something like a huge asset which will live for 100 years, there will be necessity. There will be the asset also has to go through shift through certain hands, right? I have no problem in I have no issues in mutual funds. Taking a bit of risk and investing. The challenge is that when everybody wants to exit the mutual fund scheme because of open-endedness, right? And usually these things happen when there is a crisis only, right? When there is a big crisis happening, there has to be some support mechanism, either from SEBI. I think SEBI also is looking at it, or maybe from RBI, like SEC, does provide exit. They do buy corporate bonds, they do buy papers, right? They've actually, the Federal Reserve has bought papers. We don't have that mechanism for corporate bonds. We don't have that mechanism for the mutual funds there's a run on the mutual fund. Where will they get their liquidity from? I mean, they need to have get some extra liquidity for a short period of time, or somebody should provide repo funding or something like that for this thing. And typically, Federal Reserve has done that in the past. Federal Reserve has done that regularly. I mean, for real estate assets and all of that. So they need to have if you have a mechanism like that, worst case scenario, if you have a situation that they will be protected, particularly when there is a run on the end. See, this doesn't happen under normal conditions. This happens only under difficult conditions. Of course, you should not have too much of concentration risk, in the sense that it is better for a mutual fund to hold 2-3% or 5% of infra asset in a fund, rather than creating a infra fund only, which has got only infrastructure. Because if there is a problem there, everything goes down, and you're finding so you need to have some sort of so 5% in it's a medium term fund, or 10% in the medium term, with a bit of ALM and underlying asset, it should be manageable. I don't think it should be a big problem. So ALM risk are generally overstated. I think if the quality of asset is good, cash flow generating assets are there. Let us say, like we talked about HAM. What is the challenge in the HAM which can come in future? Everything is going to be paid by NHA at some point of time. If the NHA is having so much of commitments and NHA doesn't collect tolls, so NHA will have to. Yeah, so at some point of time, do we need so much of roads, or whatever roads which are doing, is it going to generate paying capacity? What is the problem in power? Power is that ultimately the consumer is not paying anything, and consumer is paying less. I mean, it's not paying. A lot of free power is given and all of that. That flows through the entire economic system of power, and which creates a drag on everybody. Right? I mean, the whole sector gets weakened. Plus the ESG complications, it ensures that thermal power is in a bad shape. I mean, it's in a very difficult shape. So as long as the final consumer comfortable paying reasonable price, then there is no problem. It cannot be political decisions. It cannot be, earlier government did something, how to do the reverse, the whole thing. You have that, like AP and all that is all basically re-looking at the whole thing, regulation, and changing the law during the course. Some of those issues will be there. Anyway, I can tell you one thing which is very good happened in the infrastructure sector today. We had a High Court ruling that 1 year automatic extension of performance guarantee clause. We had filed a court in Delhi High Court. They given a ruling that it cannot happen. It can't be rolled over. There's a claim period, automatic extension of 1 year was there because some of the banks and the bank institutions, they are taking a view like that because of some Supreme Court judgment which happened in 97 or 98. So that has been reversed today. So there are good things happening. I'm saying I'm very lot more optimistic about how it's possible for us to move. We need to do the right thing and right cash flows. I think everything is possible. I don't think we cannot keep cribbing that.
Thanks.
Solutions are all available.
Yeah.
We have the instrument. We need to be a bit. See, we cannot keep swimming from one tight regulatory. See, we are a very loose regulatory regime. We have moved into the right, extreme right. Earlier, every public sector bank was funding infrastructure project. Not one public sector bank also is not there to fund because equity is gone and all of that. We need to have that. We need to have a bit of decorrelation in the sense that everybody doesn't behave the same way. That herd behavior you will have to do. You have to select the right project, and it should be possible for us.
Sure. So Harsh, coming to you, a lot has been said about InvITs and also the success that InvITs have seen, especially over the last 15 months or so. There have been a lot of improvisation done by regulators, SEBI specifically, making amendments to make it more amenable to investors, lenders. So is there any still a wish list which can make InvITs as attractive as Zomato and attracting a lot of retail capital? Mr. Marua is there, so you can be open in asking whatever you want.
So, okay. So, I would say upfront, InvIT should not become as attractive as Zomato, right?
Okay.
There is infrastructure assets, cash flow backed, long-term stable assets. They should not become a frenzy because that is a recipe for disaster 5 years down the line. And when that happens, you close down markets for another 10 years, right? And then the social infrastructure doesn't get built with such volatility. So I would say, as such, I mean, it's the first time I would say that there is not much that is, to be honest, pending for regulators to do in terms of enabling InvITs or REITs to succeed. I think there are a couple of more amendments which are recommending Ministry of Finance from tax perspective, which to be honest are more anomalies. Like InvITs get taxed for within a short-term capital gains if you sell before 3 years, but it still pays STT like equity where the holding period is 1 year. That's an anomaly which we are recommending the Government of India or CBDT to consider. But beyond that, from a regulatory perspective, I would say it's very well placed right now. And now it is a matter of more and more businesses coming to fruition from scale perspective. Right? So as Mr. Govindan earlier said, metro, school, railways, hospital, there is so much capital that can be tapped if properly packaged, properly contracted, and then brought to market. And markets are, if markets can reward, what we are seeing today, certainly markets would reward predictable cash flows that comes from either hospitals or education or other institutions. So point is about creating more supply in the country, accepting the reality that monetizing doesn't mean selling. It is the right thing to do for the residual institution because you're creating more capacity to grow and doing more and more business models. I think that's the place where we need to focus on. But other than that, I would say, first, I would say InvITs and REITs are pretty much from a regulatory perspective settled.
Great to hear that. And we are really running short of time and getting constantly nudged by Abha to close the session. So there are a lot of things which I would have loved to discuss with this eminent panel, but time is not on our side. So I would like to close the session. Special thanks to Mr. Anand Barua for joining and giving a keynote address. Mr. Sujoy Bose to share his overview on the sector. Mr. Govindan, Ms. Sheth, Mr. Harsha. Thanks a lot for your very candid remarks and your discussions in this session. We'll definitely make a note of that and circulate to all the stakeholders. Thanks a lot and take care.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.